Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Your humble servant and representative of the Soros Foundation, Alexander Goldfarb, had a bit of an argument. Well, it seems to me that our discussion, except for a somewhat academic beginning, later turned into a fight, and feathers were flying, in some cases even down.
Good morning once again. Thank you very much for finding the time and, most importantly, the desire and opportunity to participate.
The participant has questions.
Go ahead, of course, please.
You know, I don't know about everyone else, but I came here not to argue, but to try to understand and to explain my position. But in order to understand and explain, we need to agree on what the words we use actually mean. For example, I've heard Alexander often say that Trump is essentially an immoral person, though he might use terms like lack of morality. But for example, I have absolutely no idea what Alexander considers to be moral. For example, from my point of view, any person who takes what belongs to you, meaning takes it without your permission, is acting immorally. They can take away your property, they can take away your patents, your ideas, they can take away your time, your life, and in that case, you don't agree to give it up. Today, I would really like us to try not just to throw around terms that I'm 100% sure we all understand differently, but rather to base things on some numbers, facts, in other words, on something that can be measured. And if we need to introduce some concept, let's explain it instead of just throwing words around.
Come on, yes, Alexander, do you have any objections?
I have no objections because I don't quite understand what the question is about. All right, we'll deal with the issue of definitions, what everyone understands by what. Let's start with that. So my understanding of the situation is connected not so much with the concepts of morality, but with the concepts of political history that we are all living through right now. It is undoubtedly connected with certain concepts that have developed over these millennia, for example, the concept of democracy. And so I would like to start at least by defining what democracy is and what the alternative forms of political systems are. This is directly related to what democracy is now. This word comes from the word demos.
Unfortunately, because of my initial statement, I made things a bit academic, but I promise that this will only be at the beginning and somewhere around here. There, I know, around the 13th or 14th minute, things will start to get interesting. And to be honest, I was the one who started it too.
In ancient Greece, which actually did not mean, as is commonly believed, the power of the people, but rather the power of the enlightened people or a certain structure. In contrast to the demos, as I understand it, I see another concept from ancient Greece, which is called ochlos, and from this comes the concept of ochlocracy. Maybe people have heard of it, and those who haven't can look it up on the internet. Ochlos means a crowd, and accordingly, democracy is the power of the people. Demos differs from ochlocracy, which is ruled by the ochlos, or the crowd. The difference is that in the first case, there is a certain system of rules that all participants in the process agree with. These rules include laws, limitations on power, minority rights, the right to free discussion, and certain structures that prevent abuse. The ochlocracy, that is the rule of the mob or the rule of the people, is basically power, it's chaos, it's the power of chaotic, so to speak, popular will, which is not connected in any way to structures where there are no rules and everything is decided spontaneously. So to speak, whoever shouts the loudest wins, so to speak, the love of the masses. And in the case of ochlocracy, in the end, power usually ends up in the hands of demagogues and populists who basically fool the not so sophisticated masses. And as a result, what we have seen several times throughout history happens. A classic example of ochlocracy is fascism, Bolshevism, and others. For example, some kind of radical Islamism where a certain ideology is put at the forefront. And with the help of this ideology, demagogues and populists seize control and begin to rule in their own interests at the expense of the majority, even though the majority supports them. And I think that right now America is at a crossroads where the forces that lead to the rise of mob rule are, so to speak, gaining strength. Sorry for the tautology. And as a result, we might end up in a situation where classical democracy based on rules, moderation, reason, and, so to speak, a rational, educated structure of society gives way to this chaos, the rule of the mob. This hasn't happened yet, but so to speak, the actions of the current American authorities, primarily represented by Trump and his movement, are leading to this. That doesn't mean it will happen. In recent decades, for example, such trends have appeared in various democratic countries, but they have somehow managed to restrain this tendency. For example, if we recall such a sad event in European history as Brexit, that is, the United Kingdom's exit from the European Union, which most Britons now regret, because this very Brexit brought nothing good to Britain. This is an example of how, under the influence of demagogues and populists, they managed, so to speak, to cloud the minds of the majority, and most people voted for this very Brexit. Then they started tearing their hair out. But it's impossible to turn this thing back now. The same thing is happening here in America right now. There are symptoms of how, under the influence of populist and demagogic sentiments, so to speak, obviously harmful political directions and decisions are being made. And for me, as someone with a background in biology, the most striking thing was what is happening now in healthcare. That is, the ban on evidence-based medicine, the cancellation or restriction of the vaccination system, which without a doubt, again, I say this as a professional, will lead to a deterioration of public health and an increase in the number of deaths. And everything that humanity managed to get rid of 100 years ago when immunization was introduced, this is an example. And there are many such things happening now. And all this is happening because, given the new technologies in mass media, most inexperienced people, or let's say a certain number of inexperienced people, are being sold, to put it simply, all sorts of conspiracy theories. And as a result, demagogues end up on top. Again, for example, we can mention our current Minister of Health, Robert Kennedy, or Trump himself. And as a result, we make such ochlocratic decisions that it may lead to a significant number of people supporting these destructive, so to speak, directions in politics again in the next elections. And he says, well, I guess I'll finish with this because my time is almost up. I'll finish with what I have. And the trends are such that at the moment, when decisive changes are taking place, it is possible, so to speak, for direct violent actions to be taken by the usurpers. Authorities, as we saw during the attempted coup on January 6, 2021, when that is part of the Republican Party. With the support of this mobocratic element, also known as the Make America Great Again movement, they tried to seize the Capitol by force and impose on political leaders the idea of overturning the election results and replacing them with a forceful takeover of power, including violent actions against elected representatives. The same thing is happening now. It's absolutely clear to me that preparations are being made for such a forceful seizure of power in case they lose this year's elections and the next presidential elections. And an example of such a forceful takeover is the recent SDR raid on the Election Commission in Georgia's Fulton County, where all the election documents and archives from 2020 were seized. And it was declared at the highest level that we're doing this in order to once again review the election results in Fulton County to supposedly establish that those elections were rigged. This is kind of a test run or a show of force. This is what we should expect at the end of this year in the midterm elections and in the 2028 elections, when the majority of Americans, as recent public opinion polls show, will decide to throw this political force into the dustbin of history and vote against it. I think I'll wrap it up here.
Thank you, Alexander. Your position is clear.
On June 5, 2025, you said that anything that weakens America is beneficial for Putin, and that's why Trump is beneficial for him. So I watched all the interviews and didn't find a single fact there that would prove the claim that Trump weakens America. That is, I found a lot of repeatedly stated claims there, but not once was there a single figure or any concrete evidence given that Trump did something that was good for Russia, but bad for the United States. Because if he does something good for the United States and it just happens to also be good for Russia, then what business is that of ours? Now, so next, you also said that there are people left in the Republican Party who are dissatisfied with his, so to speak, romantic relationship with Putin. I understand you didn't mean anything sexual by that. That's why Trump can't publicly and openly applaud Putin. Like, what a great guy, he's bombing Ukraine again. Like, what a great guy, he's bombing Ukraine. Those are your words, Alexander. The point is that Trump likes that Putin is bombing Ukraine. Trump can't say this openly, but his actions kind of show it, because somehow you understood it. By the way, that's an interesting position for a person to take. Trump stopped several wars, Armenia with Azerbaijan, Thailand with Cambodia, Congo with Rwanda. So, looking at his actions, you can say that he stops wars. Stopping a war is a moral action. From my point of view, stopping the killing of people is a positive action. It seems to me that the answer to one question is, yes, he stops the war, it's a moral action, it's a positive action. In addition, Trump organized the Abraham Accords, which helped strengthen trade and diplomatic ties in the Middle East, reduce the risk of war, and prevent the destruction of Israel, because this destruction, in principle, always exists somewhere out there. Trump stops wars, he doesn't start them. Where did Alexander get the idea that Trump wants to and applauds Putin? I don't think he would ever say that to anyone who bombs anywhere, including Ukraine. It's completely unclear to me. That's already your third different speech. Trump doesn't do anything that would really get on Putin's nerves. But here we need to approach this a bit more in detail, because Alexander's claim is that Trump doesn't do anything that would harm Putin. Well, for example, regarding Russia, I personally got a completely different impression, but let's try to analyze it. I'll be talking about foreign affairs now, and then during our questions and answers, and especially during our short 15-minute free conversation, we will also touch on the internal situation. So let's start with, say, Venezuela. After Maduro's decline, the United States declared de facto control over Venezuela's oil industry, and directly stated its goal to push Russia, China, and Iran out of the country. Russian projects, loans, and political influence are being devalued. Experts say that Moscow is losing the billions it invested and its foothold in the Western Hemisphere. The United States' withdrawal, takeover, and control of Venezuela doesn't benefit Russia. I'm only addressing that. Morally, Yebel had no right. Whether it's beneficial or not, I'm only commenting on what's beneficial or not. Perhaps Alexander thinks that the fact that we have de facto taken over Venezuela is beneficial for Russia, because he says that Trump never does anything. If things are bad for Russia, then somehow Russia is neutral or doing well. Now it means taking over or neutralizing Iran. The operation against Iran is directly described as an attempt to cut off Russia's influence in the region. Losing a Middle Eastern partner makes it harder for Moscow to bypass sanctions, so neutralizing Iran is very disadvantageous for Russia. In other words, it's the direct opposite of what Alexander claimed in a dozen interviews. Now about NATO. Trump came to NATO during his first term and said, if you sabotage our decisions and don't pay at least 2% of your budget, that means for your own armies to defend your countries, then I will stop protecting you, go take a hike. You're not fulfilling your, so to speak, obligations, and I won't fulfill mine. So what happened? NATO countries rapidly increased their defense budgets, and by 2024-2025, 22 countries had reached the 2% of gross domestic product mark. Now Trump has come for a second time. Trump realized back in 1947 that Europeans were spending money on social programs instead of preparing for war. At the same time, they are hoping for luck, counting on Americans to spend enough money to protect not only America, but also them. Trump decided that the situation in Europe resembles the situation in Ukraine, when Ukraine was not preparing for war with Russia, but behaved provocatively and embezzled the budget. That's why Trump told Europe to allocate 5% of their budget to defense. That is, Trump did more for NATO than anyone else in today's world. He is the person who restored NATO, exactly the opposite of what Alexander says. He is rebuilding it, turning it from an amorphous organization incapable of defending itself into a combat-ready, effective, and powerful force. The NATO Secretary General has confirmed this multiple times. The conclusion is that NATO's strengthening, NATO's efforts and rearmament are definitely not beneficial for Russia. I have a question for Alexander. It's not mandatory since he just started answering, but I wanted to ask. If you think that Trump didn't do anything bad to the Kremlin regime, then what I just told you must be good for the Kremlin regime, good for Russia, for the Kremlin personally, for Vladimir Vladimirovich. Because if you didn't know what I just told you, then I'm very glad that we ended up together and I was able to tell you about it. So, do you still think that Trump didn't do anything to annoy or offend Putin? Or has your opinion changed a little bit? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Leon. Well, I guess we're moving on to the next stage. The opening statements and the positions of the participants today are clear. So let's move on to the questions now. And Leon has just asked the first question to Alexander. Alexander, please, you answer, and then you can ask your question to Leon.
All right, let's start with the fact that, in my opinion, Trump is caught between two fires. On one hand, he has a clear sympathy and favor toward Putin and his regime, as well as toward many autocratic and repressive regimes around the globe, and a dislike for democratic and liberal Europe. This has been stated many times in various kinds of policy documents, speeches, and statements. Starting with the famous speech by James David Vance at the conference in Munich and ending with Trump's latest speech in Davos. He clearly does not sympathize with the principles on which the democratic liberal democracy of Western Europe is built, and he has never criticized repressive regimes such as Putin's regime, for example. That's the first point. And so, on the one hand, he has an obvious sympathy for these people, for these regimes, because they are, in general, close to his own vision of how the politics of countries should be organized. On the other hand, he has, so to speak, inherited from previous generations a situation where, objectively, from the point of view of interests and, so to speak, long-term consequences, the interests of America and the entire free world are at odds with the interests of authoritarian and anti-democratic regimes. He has to deal with public opinion, history, and the political establishment, including the establishment of his own party. If you set aside this populist movement in America, they are generally clearly on the pro-democratic side. For example, if we look at the tradition left to us by people like Ronald Reagan or John McCain, and those who now call themselves their followers, they are in sharp disagreement with Trump on foreign policy issues. Therefore, being in this sort of tunnel between two generally incompatible trends, Trump has to maneuver. I'll say that I personally have absolutely nothing against America using its power and influence in the world to promote its own interests, but only to the extent that America is a democracy, a democratic country where the mechanisms of liberal democracy function. That's what I was talking about at the very beginning, meaning as long as America builds its foreign policy based on its internal system and brings the principles of democracy to the world, I don't see anything wrong with America, so to speak, using its resources and capabilities to promote this policy or this trend around the globe. But the most striking example is America's role in the fight against German Nazism during World War II, when it was absolutely clear that without America, nothing good would have come out of it. And it would have been absurd to demand, say, in 1943 or 1942, that France or Great Britain or other European countries make the same contribution to the fight against Hitler as America did. On the contrary, both then and after the war, American taxpayers financed the struggle of liberal democratic countries against communist tyranny. This is happening again. Europe, of course, should take care of its own security, and Ukraine even more so. But let's face the truth, without America, none of this will happen. If only for the simple reason that Europe doesn't know how to make those weapons, and Europe doesn't have an army like the United States does. That's why America undoubtedly has a historical and, so to speak, ideological duty to use its power and intervene in the affairs of humanity, sometimes from a position of strength. But again, only to the extent that America itself remains a democratic country at the moment when America turns into one of those regimes. And now I think that's where things are heading, and it won't be much different from Putin's regime or the regime in Saudi Arabia. Then all of this loses any meaning. That's why I think, yes, America should participate, it should pay. This is, so to speak, its historical purpose, and generations of Americans, including both the right and the left, understood this very well. And no one, let me remind you, only some very, very radical right-wing circles objected to Lend-Lease at the time or to the Marshall Plan. because the purpose of Lend-Lease was to oppose Hitler, and the purpose of the Marshall Plan was to oppose Stalin. And that's how it was if we're talking about history. Now, Israel and the Abraham Accords were mentioned. I have nothing to argue about here. I believe that was a very correct and sensible policy by the United States to stimulate or use the hostility of all these Arab Afghanists. The Sunni theocracies towards the Iranian regime in order to, so to speak, strengthen their own position. But I will say that the main opponents of Trump's position and policy in the Arab-Palestinian-Israeli conflict are actually the Israeli right, including Netanyahu himself and the right wing of his government. It is they who are now fiercely arguing with what the American administration is doing, imposing on the Israeli right-wing government a political path that leads to the creation of a Palestinian state under its auspices.
We've already been sitting here for 10 minutes, and you said it would be 2 or 3 minutes.
Yes, let's do it then. Let's do everything.
I mean...
Yes, you, Alexander.
Stop me if I go too far.
All right, agreed, Alexander.
And you too.
Ed.
Apparently, I have the right to answer this correctly.
Not now. Alexander has a question.
And I thought that, in my opinion...
It says there, give a short reply.
Let Leon respond.
You know, I guess I'm kind of a by-the-book person. If someone writes something to me, I take it seriously. So if we're being serious, here's my reply. I had 1 minute to answer the question, if I remember correctly, and for the response, there were 2-3 minutes, there were 10. And then I have the right to somehow respond to that answer for 1 minute. Is that right?
All right, yes, let's do it.
Let's break all of this to hell. What's the point of all this anyway? Okay, my answer is nobody answered my question. Just 10 minutes of explaining something I never even asked about. I asked which side the sun rises from on Earth, and I got an answer about water boiling at 90 degrees or 100. So, I don't understand anything. What are we even talking about? I don't agree with any of the statements that were made, but that's fine. It's your right to make them. But everything you're saying is absolutely unsubstantiated. Not once have you said anything that could be backed up by facts. You support it with some kind of reasoning. So, in the future, it will be very bad. Very bad, but why will it be so bad in the future? Are you Cassandra, Nebuchadnezzar, or maybe Nostradamus? Someone who can predict the future. Who are we to predict the future? If you explain today's situation and yesterday's differences between A and B, I'd understand. But listening for 10 minutes about how terrible the situation will be if something like this continues, what don't you like? I don't like bureaucracy and I don't like democracy. What's happening in Europe is a nightmare. It's just called democracy. Vens did a great job. He explained everything to them very well, guys. You can't imprison people who are supposed to have freedom of speech just because you don't like what they're saying, but you imprison them. Alexander is now defending this indiscriminately without explaining what he disliked. What Vens said, just that Vens gave a terrible speech, and then Trump gave a terrible speech a while ago. Alexander just gave a terrible speech. That's my answer. Thank you.
Alexander, your question.
My question concerns, well, for example, where is the weaponry that Ukraine is supposed to use to defend itself against Russian aggression? Where are the Tomahawk missiles? Where are those billions of dollars that America promised but hasn't given? And what sense would it make for America if Ukraine loses this war?
Leon, take more time if needed. No,
that's more than enough. Thanks. Alexander, the question is, where are the weapons? It's where Ukraine hasn't made it since 1990, but has stolen everything that could be stolen. And the second most powerful force on the territory of the former Soviet Union has turned into, well, let's say Moldova. Yes, so two republics of the former Soviet Union had negative industrial growth, Moldova and Ukraine. All the others had positive growth. Russia, if I recall, had 30–40%, and Latvia and Lithuania were similar. Ukraine is one of the two republics that looted everything to such an extent and didn't prepare for anything at all. And 4 months before the invasion, there was already Georgia, there was already Crimea. 4 months before the 2022 invasion, the Americans started talking. Biden wanted it that way. At least from my point of view, that's what he said. Maybe he misspoke, but at the very least he said that if you guys quickly take over Russia, we won't interfere. Yes, that's what he said. This exists. It's his. I'm not making this up. It's a fact. I don't have it now, but you can check anywhere. That's what Biden said. And this was a month before the invasion, so Ukraine, even 4 months before Russia invaded, not only did they not start doing anything like, say, asking the Americans to bring in 20,000 soldiers and station them at the border for joint exercises. No, they also cleared all the minefields that stretched from Belarus to Kyiv. Why? I don't know why, who the hell knows, but that's what they did with the first weapons. That's where they didn't make them. That's the first answer. The second question is, who do we owe anything to? Who do we owe anything to? I've spent 51 years living outside the Soviet Union's borders. I was just thinking, when you said this, do I owe anyone anything? Why in Ukraine? By the way, in Congo, 6 million people were killed in 30 days of war. Why don't I owe anything there? There are a huge number of different places where people are being killed. So yes, one of my grandfathers was born in the Kharkiv region, then moved to St. Petersburg, but just because my grandfather was born there, emotionally, I feel obligated to Ukraine. Why shouldn't a farmer in Iowa buy, I don't know, a phone for his son or a bicycle for his daughter, but instead has to send that money to buy weapons? Why Ukraine? That's nonsense. No one promised anything. They mentioned the Budapest Memorandum, but no one in Ukraine has read it. We didn't deceive them. Others did. Everything in that stinky document, excuse my language, isn't French yet, but it will be. So here's what it says. If someone attacks you, we promise to go to the United Nations Security Council and talk about it. That's all that's written there, nothing else. I read it left to right to left, in Hebrew, in English, any way you want. It's all there is, nothing else is written. No one promised that we would supply them with weapons or send people there to guard them. Why is this conflict, which is inside Europe, between so-called brotherly peoples who can't divide something among themselves? Look at the last names of these oligarchs in Russia, at the last names of these oligarchs in Ukraine. Half of the Russian oligarchs have Ukrainian last names, half of the oligarchs are Jewish, of course, and half of the oligarchs in Ukraine are Russian. Yes, they are. Poroshenko, while being president, traded with Russia even while at war. Today, people tell me things, but I know how to look at the numbers. During the time of the annexation of Crimea and the start of the war, the trade turnover between Russia and Ukraine didn't stop. It actually increased by 30%. From the moment Crimea was annexed to the start of active warfare, the trade turnover between Russia and Ukraine increased by 30%. He's saying something complicated. Should I pay now? For the fact that they're crooked bastards stealing everything they can, deceiving their own people. They've forced 6 million to flee, killed 1 million people when they were about to sign. And I told Rakami about this. I flew to Istanbul twice. We agreed on everything. It was exactly 23 days after the active phase of the war began. In 2022, Rakam flew to Istanbul and agreed with the Russians on everything. Russia got slapped then, totally unexpected. Because Trump supplied Javelin weapons and so on, Trump left weapons, Obama sent blankets, and Biden was stealing, and Biden. His main attitude toward Ukraine was this: if you don't immediately fire the prosecutor general of Ukraine, who is investigating my son, who is obviously stealing in Ukraine, then I won't give you the billion that America promised you. If you do something good for my son, then America, not me, Biden, will give you the billion. If you don't do it, you won't get the billion. That's why we didn't promise anything. We spent huge amounts of money to get rid of democracy in Ukraine. We spent about $5 billion, 2 terms of Newland in Congress and in the Senate, and you can check it all. We spent $5 billion, and that's only the funds we admitted to, so that Ukrainians would go to Maidan and remove the person who wanted to. With both presidents, we were involved in stirring things up. America, what weapons we promised them, we arranged it. But we didn't start this war. Putin is a scoundrel. Putin is a bloody maniac, and so on. Not for starting the war, but for his methods of waging it. Still, that's not our concern. Once again, why should someone in Arizona have to give their money to make things better for someone else in Congress? How much money did Ukrainians donate to Guatemala, where 0 people were killed? Why should Americans donate their money to Ukraine? Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Leon. Alexander has the right to respond, so let's stick to the time and move on. 3 minutes for your response, please, Alexander.
I'll try to be brief. I have almost no comments on the speech we just heard. It speaks for itself. I'll remind you, it's remarkable, this idea of why should we? It reminds me of the speeches of right-wing politicians in 1940, 1941, and 1942, when they opposed the United States entering World War II and opposed helping Great Britain and the Soviet Union in the war against Hitler. The war would have been lost, so who spent how much money on aid to Ukraine and on weapons? You can easily look it up. Just go to Google and check. The difference between the Trump administration and, let's say, the Biden administration is dozens of times greater. The weapons that Ukraine is fighting with come from the Trump administration. Well, about corruption, there's a lot of corruption. Right now, we're experiencing a fantastic corruption scandal related to the Epstein files, in which everyone is involved. But again, if you compare the corruption of the times, no one accused Zelensky of corruption. As for Poroshenko, yes, there was corruption, but it doesn't compare in scale to the corruption. Trump, who personally enriched himself by more than $1 billion using his position as president, starting with the fact that he makes lucrative contracts with the government and ending with him enriching his friends by manipulating the stock market. So I really have nothing to say about that. Let me ask, I have a question now. It's my turn.
Yes, we each have 3 questions. Yes, one at a time. You've already asked yours. Participants, well.
Let me then, so to speak, ask right away, while it's still fresh, a question about the corruption of the Trump administration and his family, their personal enrichment because they have administrative and economic resources in their hands.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. And what is the question?
The question is, do you see elements of corruption in what's happening, for example, with this family Bitcoin company? And in your opinion, is this right, or does it fall under your understanding of corruption?
I just really don't understand the question because maybe there's something I don't know. Well, for example, you made a statement that the scale of Trump's corruption is significantly greater than that of Poroshenko. So you know the amount of money stolen by Trump and the amount stolen by Poroshenko. How do you know that? Where do you get that information? You're the only one who knows this. Second, Trump made $1 billion during his first term. Well, as a result of his first term, he became $1 billion richer. Here I have to say that the numbers don't support you. Trump's net worth at the moment he left his first presidency when he finished was estimated to be 2 billion less than when he came to power. And a lot has been written about this. The left-wing press was sarcastic, and the right-wing press said, look, all presidents, let's say Obama leaves office, 2 months go by, and suddenly he has $100 million in his account, from 0 to 100 million. And for what? Well, there are a whole number of, so to speak, organizations that suddenly, let's say it's unclear for what reason, he was paid $100 million. It came from 3 different sources. Now take Gore. When he left power, yes, in 2 years he made a fortune of $200 million, meaning he was being paid off for some deals. Now Trump left power and he was $1 billion less. So, what you said reminds me of, like Ivanov won in soccer. Not won, but lost. Not in soccer, but in preference. Not Ivanov, but Ramonoric. Yes, so it's exactly the opposite. Not that he gained $1 billion, but Trump lost $2 billion. Now, these are numbers you can easily check yourself. If you give me 30 seconds, I'll pull them up for you right away and show you everything. Now, then there was another completely fantastic statement, absolutely unsupported by anything, just your accusation. Things like that are simply judged in court. In reality, it's about enriching Trump's friends through market manipulation. Wow, unbelievable. And I could say something like, you killed your friends, your nephew. What nephew? I had a niece named Irit, not a nephew. It's the same idea. Throw dirt at someone and wash off what you can. It was kind of astonishing to hear that in our discussion. Now, you said Biden gave dozens of times more. I wrote down what you said. Biden gave dozens, not 10, but dozens. At least 20 times more. Dozens. So 2 dozen, 1 million or more. Biden gave 20 times more weapons than Trump. Excuse me, where did you get this information from, or are you making it up as you go, which is more likely, or are you using some completely fantastic sources? What are you saying? What are you even talking about? 20 times more. My God, now let's get to the essence of your question so no one can say I didn't answer it. You haven't given a single figure yet to prove there was corruption. You just said how you feel about Trump's corruption. I feel very good about it. You know why? Because I don't see it. If you see it, bring it out and say it, instead of throwing mud and hoping something sticks to the wall.
Uh-huh.
Thank you, Leon. Alexander, you can make a brief comment, then Leon will have a question. Well,
regarding the weapons the Biden administration provided to Ukraine. I don't remember the exact numbers right now, but it's something around $80 billion in military and economic aid during his term. At the time, as javelins were mentioned here, they amounted to only about 12 million, so that's an order of magnitude less. Right now, everything Ukraine receives is paid for by Europe. That's the first thing. Second, if you're talking about specific examples of corruption, the numbers refer to Trump's new term just for this year. Anyone can go on Google and look up how much the Trump family's wealth has grown in a year. In the past year or year and a half, you'll see figures in the hundreds of millions of dollars, mostly related to Bitcoin trading. And as a specific example of a corrupt event, we can recall the airplane. The cost, I think, was either 100 or 200 million or more. I don't remember the exact figure now, but we're talking about hundreds of millions. There is a partnership. Qatar gave Trump a gift, definitely not out of selflessness.
And Qatar gave Trump a gift. He gave it to the United States of America, and now it is in the United States of America in the air fleet. About the fact that his fortune increased, did you forget what Trump created? Between 1945 and 1947, he created an organization called True Social, which didn't exist before. He created it with his own hands. Today, his fortune is estimated at about $5 billion. So naturally, he became richer because he created an organization. That's how it works in our free market. In capitalism, value is created. You come up with something, people like it, they buy it, they pay you, and you become richer. What's the connection? If you believe capitalism is corrupt, you're absolutely right. But that's why I initially asked that we try to explain things in a way that you can understand each other. Now I understand you think the free market is corruption, while I believe it's the only way to develop humanity. Well, okay, let me ask my question.
Please, your question.
Leon Trump lowers the price of oil, brings liquefied gas to Europe, kicked Russia out of Venezuela, and is trying to do the same in Iran. He moved the United States Embassy to Jerusalem and recognized the Golan Heights. As someone who served in the Israeli army and fought on those heights, these actions are meaningful to me. I know exactly why this is important to us. So he brought in the fleet to protect Israel from Iran's missiles. Trump ended several wars, imposed tariffs on manufacturers, curbed illegal migration, lowered inflation, and reduced drug flow into the United States. His people found 120,000 out of the 300,000 children brought in without parents who had been given into slavery. Some ended up as servants and in factories, some in brothels. We all know this. Trump has found 120,000 of them, showing he's fighting crime and reducing it in cities. Wherever they let him in, that's his area. So my question to you is, what don't you like about all this? Why do you think he's bad for America? President, now you'll see a showdown. I'm asking a specific question. Halparp is carefully avoiding it, very carefully. I insist, of course, intelligent people wouldn't do that, but I insist I'm being accused of deception, but well, not really, and it's like Ostap got carried away. That's what follows.
First of all, in my opinion, much of what you listed does not correspond to reality.
In other words, I'm a despicable liar, but I'm not, no, really not, when they tell me that I'm lying. If possible, could you tell me exactly what?
Let's go point by point.
Then right off the bat?
You list your points and I'll respond to them. And the second thing I wanted to say is that all of this is indirectly related to what I started with, namely that Trump is moving toward usurping power and establishing a regime of personal rule.
You're Cassandra, yes.
Yes, I'm Cassandra in that sense, okay?
And Nostradamus. The first point I mentioned is that Trump is bringing liquefied gas to Europe. Is that true or not?
American oil companies, not Trump himself, are bringing oil to Europe. Why?
Why wasn't this done under Biden and Obama? Unclear. Yeah, of course, Trump doesn't carry anything himself at all. He doesn't go out in the morning, warming up by hauling cans of liquefied gas to Europe. You're right. Why have a conversation at this level? Pardon me? So we've established that I wasn't lying when I said that Trump is delivering liquefied gas to Europe. Trump kicked Russia out of Venezuela. Venezuela is a deception.
We still need to see how it all ends.
At the moment, he kicked Russia out of Venezuela. It's a deception.
It's not a deception.
Everyone moved on. Trump is trying to do the same thing in Iran. Let me break it down for you. Is it a deception or not? No.
What he's trying to do?
We'll find out if he's deceiving us or not.
I don't see
that this is a deception or not. You accused me of lying. I'm not L.E. I'm not L.E. when I'm accused of lying. You must answer for your words, Alexander.
That's open to interpretation.
He's trying to do the same thing in Iran as that's open to interpretation.
First of all, I don't see that he kicked Russia out of Venezuela. So far, the same regime that was under Maduro is still ruling in Venezuela. Secondly, the question of what will happen with Iran is unclear because, as we can see...
I said Trump is trying to do the same thing.
Leon, let's do it this way. We'll still give Alexander a chance to respond, but you'll have a chance to add your comment.
It was Alexander who suggested that I ask question after question so he could answer each one. And I'm asking specifically, did I lie about this? Alexander is again saying, that's not how it'll be.
As far as I remember, Alexander didn't accuse you of lying.
That's right. Let's rewind the tape. He said that most of what I said wasn't true.
That much of it
that you said
is inaccurate. So about Iran, I'm not sure that Trump's policy towards Iran will lead to a weakening.
You're trying to be Nostradamus. You're not either. I'm saying he's trying to do the same thing in Iran. I don't know how you can be more specific. He's trying to do the same thing in Iran.
What?
I think I lied.
He also boosts Putin's influence in Europe.
In this, Trump is trying to do the same thing in Iran. Where I lied?
I didn't say you lied. You said
that I deceived. You said that I told an untruth.
You're presenting your interpretation of events as reality. We have to. That is.
In other words, I didn't lie. So Trump moved the United States Embassy to Jerusalem, where I lied. Thank you.
This has nothing to do with me,
said Trump. He moved the United States Embassy to Jerusalem, where I lied. I even began to feel sorry for the old man we ended up with. He, Vovka Putin, and I are about the same age, maybe a year or two apart.
Trump relocated the United States Embassy to Jerusalem. So what?
Did I lie or not? Everything we're figuring out, I lied. That's what I said. To which you said that I was not telling the truth.
And I didn't say that.
You said I wasn't being truthful. Most of what Leon just said, you didn't say, Leon, what he just said was not true. I wrote down your words. That's why I'm saying.
Does not match reality. He translated, I agree with his translation and with the embassy.
Now he admitted Holland, where is the lie? To be continued.
Once again.
He saw Hollandy.
All right, he recognized Hollandy. Let's move on. He recognized Hollandy.
Yes, no, did I lie?
Trump recognized Hollandy, recognized, okay.
So I didn't lie. You admit that you were wrong. I didn't lie. Trump brought in the fleet to protect Israel from Iran's missiles. Where did I lie?
That's true, but how is that related to the relationship with Putin?
You told me that I lied. I don't like being told that. You said what you said, so please defend your position. That's it. I apologize for accusing you of lying. I misspoke.
You listed all of the above as evidence that Trump is an enemy.
You accused me of lying.
Will you let me finish my sentence? Go ahead.
Leon, let's be fair. Alexander can respond first, then you'll have your turn.
You listed a huge number of things that are not directly related to the matter at hand as proof that Trump is an enemy of Putin and does not strengthen his position. I argue that Trump, by doing many of the things he does, not only fights against Putin, but also helps him. This is international.
It's terribly interesting, don't you think? Did I say something about Putin's position, or is Goldfarb lying again? I have the question written down, so let me repeat it. I didn't find the word Putin anywhere. Nothing that you just tried to answer. I didn't find any of that. You know, I'm actually starting to enjoy this conversation because unfortunately it confirms my observation about this so-called intellectual elite that came from a certain place. I said 100%, it's written on my screen. I'm repeating myself, the word Putin. There was none of that made-up nonsense. I just asked a question. Trump is lowering the price of oil, which, in my opinion, is true. Trump is bringing liquefied gas to Europe. Trump kicked Russia out of Venezuela. Trump is trying to do the same thing in Iran. Trump moved the United States Embassy to Jerusalem. Trump recognized the Golan Heights. Trump brought in the fleet to protect Israel from Iran's missiles.
What does all of this have to do with anything?
With what? Did someone tell me? Can I ask? I'm asking him. Thank you. Why can't I ask a question? I don't want to ask a question about Putin. I want to ask a question about something else. Don't answer that it has nothing to do with Putin. Let them even sleep with each other in any position they want, whatever. I myself said that Trump stopped several wars. Trump is trying to lower taxes for manufacturers. He stopped illegal immigration, reduced inflation, and decreased the flow of drugs into the United States. His people found 120 of 300,000 trafficked children sold into slavery. Some became factory servants while others ended up in brothels. I said he's fighting crime and has reduced crime in the cities where local authorities allowed him in. So, my question was, what is it about all this that you don't like? Everything I just said. What don't you like about it? And secondly, why do you think he's bad for America? The president? And I didn't ask anything else. Neither about Putin nor about anyone else. Curtain era I didn't mention. I swear, everything I said is exactly what I just read to you again. I have it right in front of me. If you can, go ahead. If not, just say so and let's move on. Why do you think Trump is bad for America? President? That's all, thank you.
Leon Weinstein. Motnan, that's where it began. Subtitles by Dima Torzok.
Well, I feel sorry for him, and at the same time, I'd even say it's more like I feel ashamed. It's awkward to watch, yeah, and can you imagine how disgusting it was for him?
That's the first thing. And second, the reason I think Trump is a bad president is because the economy is going down. Because the most important thing is that he's weakening America on the world stage, and because, most importantly, he's leading things toward a usurpation of power and the establishment of a personal regime. That's the whole problem. As for immigration, that's a separate issue. Immigration needs to be brought under control, but not in the way he's doing it, namely by violating every conceivable and inconceivable law that protects human rights, freedom of speech, and so on.
You don't want to answer the question, so one question has nothing to do with the other. I asked them separately. As they say in America,
As they say, we have what we can handle.
Alexander replied, I am responding. You said I can respond. I am responding. I am responding. Alexander did not answer my question. He started making something up again, saying that this question actually comes from some other question, and I have already forgotten where it came from.
I think that this is on
Separate things.
In any case, we will come back to this. I think it will become clearer.
Come back to this in any case.
But why? Well, because that's exactly what we're talking about right now. I mean, Trump's role in the life of the United States. Whether he's evil or not, that's the topic of our discussion today. So one way or another, everything will revolve around that.
From my point of view, you're twisting things too.
I'm twisting things.
Of course. Alexander just said that this question comes from and made up what it comes from.
No, I'm saying
That this was a completely separate question, which has a specific relation to whether Trump is evil or not. That's exactly what I asked. Let me remind you, I asked,
Alexander responded that way, Leon.
do you trust the president?
Yes, whether his answer satisfies you or not, that's another question. But Alexander answered very well.
If I'm not mistaken, my short remark, which you included in the rules of conduct, was the following. I believe that Alexander avoided answering by starting to talk about how, apparently, I don't believe.
And
Waving my hands. He didn't say that I'm Jewish, but I'm waving my hands. And when I need to say that I don't know, I give a watermelon to a passerby and say, how should I know, and wave my hands.
that's how you counted, right? Alexander didn't answer, please.
And Alexander can't do it himself. You absolutely have to stand up for him.
No, I'm not standing up for anyone. No or yes?
It's a yes or no question.
Who are you asking, me or Alexander?
You said no right after I spoke. So I'm asking no to what? And you reply,
Who are you asking this question to? Lesha, to you?
to you, you just said, I said something. You answered no. No to what? The host. He doesn't even limp. Yes, he's without a leg. It's Radio Vera's right to seat him. As a moderator, well, we could have said, or I could have refused. But I agreed, yes, but still the bar turned out to be set very low. Yeah, he butts in just like the moderators on cable news network playing along, defending with his chest, his own. Or someone he decided to protect with his chest from the attacker. So his chainmail is just a bit short. But otherwise it's very similar and actually quite funny.
I'm starting to lose track of what I said no to.
I don't know. You just said no.
Maybe we should just move on.
What about you, host? Not me.
No, I mean, we'll move on. I just don't understand what you're asking me and what you're not.
I think you said no, but okay.
No, okay, I said no, yes.
Our discussion, instead of talking about facts, turned into the following.
Leon, this is really a discussion, but this discussion should be judged either by the viewer or by someone else. What Alexander says. Whether this suits you or not, or on the contrary, as they say, it's your right to decide for yourself how you see it.
Did you get any of that? I didn't.
Well, that's basically it. That's what I wanted to say.
Then I would really like to ask Alexander in his next remark to explain what it means when he says the economy is going down, why, and how he knows. Did he visit the future and find out that Trump will usurp or is planning to usurp power? And does it mean that immigration should be stopped in some other way, one that no one has figured out in the last 50 years? Alexander, I know how illegal immigration should be stopped if Trump is doing it the wrong way.
So there are three questions at once. So before I answer them, I want to, so to speak, recall an old saying that comes from Tomoviki, namely Jupiter, you are angry, therefore you are wrong. So,
in my opinion, it's a very foolish saying.
But that's how it's handed down.
Many foolish things exist, don't they? Our ancestors said as many, maybe more. They had more time.
All right, so I'm just stating the facts, recalling this phrase. So about the economy going down, the economy is going down. According to surveys of Americans, most believe that their financial situation has worsened, that the cost of living is rising, and that, so to speak, the prices of consumer goods are going up. And they see no satisfaction with the economic policy of the Trump administration. What was the second thing? You mentioned three topics. The first was that the economy is going down. Where from?
How did you manage to look into the future and find out that Trump is trying to establish a dictatorship?
It's very simple, because we already had an attempted coup on January 6, 2021, when crowds of that very mob, so to speak, tried to storm the Capitol and impose an illegitimate election result on the country, which in their opinion was stolen. These people were caught and Trump pardoned them, thereby sending a signal to future attackers that similar actions, attempts at a violent coup in the country, would go unpunished. That's the first thing. The second is that, unlike what happened on January 6, 2021, next time when Trump pardoned them, which sent a signal to the attackers that similar actions, attempts at a violent coup, would go unpunished. That's the first thing. It will not be possible to prevent this attempt at a coup. Trump signaled that such actions of a violent coup in the country would go unpunished. First, that very county, that very graph stock. Where, when, where to? Trump called the Secretary of State of Georgia and pressured him to find him 12,000 votes to overturn the Georgia vote count result. The very topic that the elections, that is, the 2020 elections were stolen, has been debunked many, many times, including not only dozens of courts where this claim was rejected, but also statements from Trump's own team. Starting from Vice President Pence and, for example, the Attorney General William Barr, who stated that all these claims are fabricated, up to local officials who were responsible for the elections. And finally, the last, so to speak, symptom that things are moving toward establishing a personal regime is connected to Trump's recent statements just yesterday or the day before about what he wants. And as we know, when he wants something, he tries to achieve it if no one pushes back what he wants. As he said, to analyze the elections in those very states where he lost last time, in those 15 states where he lost last time. He didn't name them, though, but everyone knows these are the states. And the nationalization of elections means taking away the control over elections that the Constitution grants to local authorities and transferring it to the federal government. He even said not the federal government, but the Republican Party. So that's it. This makes me think that Trump is pursuing a deliberate policy toward a violent, unconstitutional seizure of power in case he loses or his movement loses the next election. So that's the second question. And there was a third one. The first was the economy. The second was why I think there's a move toward a power grab. And what was the third one?
Yeah, honestly, I don't remember anymore.
Then I suggest we move on. We have one last question left. Alexander, it's your turn to ask Leon a question. Then Leon will respond and ask you a question in return.
Well, my question to Leon is actually about, let's say, first of all, what I just talked about. I would really like to hear Leon's reaction to all the symptoms I mentioned above that suggest Trump and his group are moving toward a power grab. And in addition to that, I would add a question regarding, sometimes I'm mistaken for a supporter of the Democratic Party, but that's not the case. I supported Reagan, I supported John McCain, so I think that's what Leon would say. A question about the positions of those members of the so-called traditional wing of the Republican Party, like Klan, for example, Sheinberg, or people who have left, like Paul Ryan or himself. So to speak, the traditions of the Reagan line in the Republican Party. They all turned into what is called anything but Trump, into anti-Trumpers. And judging by the latest polls, a significant portion of Republicans still believe in Make America Great Again. And this shift toward an authoritarian line is not good for either the party or the country.
Leon Poponyatiam, there are two questions here.
There are two very big questions here. So to speak, I'll try.
Let's do this. We'll give you more time, of course, so don't worry about it.
It doesn't matter. I'll try. Let's go. So let's, so to speak, sort of define these questions in order to understand what exactly I'm trying to answer. The first one relates to the coup d'etat and so on and so forth. And the second one relates to the split or division in the Republican Party, or so to speak, in the conservative movement. And where do I stand? How do I, so to speak, assess this? Who am I with there? And so on. Not just who I'm with, but why am I where I am. So let's move on to the first part. What you call an attempted coup d'etat seems incredibly strange to me. Because you see, in our country, there's an army that usually doesn't enter the country itself. There are National Guards in every state, and they can be federalized and come under a federal command. There's the police, and many ministries also have their own security forces. As far as I know, none of these, so to speak, departments, organizations, or services and so on were present or took any part in the so-called storming of the Capitol. Why do I say storming of the Capitol? Because it was insanely strange, this storming of the Capitol. Absolutely unarmed people, I mean, well, at least let's say we know that for sure, 100%. Yes, maybe someone had a service pistol or two, but as a rule, they were unarmed. They went in. How they got in there is also an interesting question. I had a few friends and acquaintances there. They went up the steps, went inside the Capitol, stayed there for a while, then left. And there were some people who were breaking doors. We still can't find them because none of the people who were close to Make America Great Again, the Tea Party, conservatives, and so on, as they say, can't find them. And to say, here he is. These were some outsiders whom nobody knew, who broke those doors. Well, I can't accuse anyone, but there is a very serious suspicion that it was the FBI, so to speak, who made an effort. Maybe themselves, maybe they sent people, maybe something else. But right now it doesn't matter. So in the end, completely unarmed people entered the Capitol, wandered around, and left within an hour. Most of them were very friendly with the police. The police opened doors, showed them where to go. The internal security, yes. Where to enter, how to proceed. 3 days before the events, Trump's people contacted the city 3 times, this is 100% proven, and asked to deploy municipal police. The city refused twice. They appealed to Nancy Pelosi, as only she can call the police or act on Congress grounds, but she refused both times. Today she's already hysterical about it. Her daughter was also hysterical about it, saying that her mother just didn't understand or didn't know or something like that. So, 3 times Trump's people asked to bring in some force because they were afraid there would be some clashes, problems, and so on, but it wasn't done. All of this is documented, all of it exists. So these people entered, were there, and basically did nothing inside the Capitol, then left and dispersed. So now those who were defending the Capitol, not really defending, but just opening the door and showing that everyone was armed. As we know, because Babbitt, who was there, the woman, the only death that resulted from this invasion, this assault, was that retired Major Babbitt. She was, so to speak, military, but in civilian clothes. A police officer pulled out his service pistol and shot her point blank, killing her, even though she wasn't taking any action. Actions that could have affected his well-being, life, and so on. So that means a coup d'etat was carried out with the help of a completely unarmed crowd of just a few thousand people. Even though 20,000 to 40,000 armed servicemen were nearby and could have come to help immediately if needed. And they didn't intervene. Not a single one of these units declared that they were coming out for Trump to support a coup. So it was some kind of strange coup that didn't affect anything and actually couldn't have affected anything. There was just a vote going on. It was important, of course. That's why they came. Gathered from all over America and went to protest, so to speak, but the protest was absolutely normal. Unfortunately, right now, I don't really understand what actually happened there, but unfortunately, with some unpleasant consequences, it was nothing like a coup. Judging by absolutely objective data, the amount of weapons, the number of people, the calls requesting, so to speak, security, and so on, there was no coup happening there. Now, could a coup happen? You know, usually the people who try to seize power have this slogan of centralization. That is, so to speak, they say, or rather they don't say it outright, but they try to centralize things so that, let's say, from some center they can command everyone. The idea that Trump could change the Constitution and somehow alter something in the state elections in some strange way at a time when, how many are there? 61% of Congress, 61% of the Senate, and 75% of the states have to vote for an amendment or change to the Constitution. It's odd because Trump conservatives make America great again and others don't have that. There are so many people in Congress and in the Senate, but they don't have that many votes. In the states, even among governors, 75% of ours are Republican. For that to go through, a change to the Constitution, that's just complete nonsense. Everything Trump says, guys, is just that. But how can you allow people to vote when they don't even show you any identification? Yeah, we get on a plane, they ask for identification at the bank, show your identification at social services, show your identification. Voting is crucial in a democracy if we support it. Personally, I oppose democracy. But, so to speak, most of the people I talk to, they don't really understand it, so they're for it. It seems to me that they don't really understand. And, so to speak, they say that this is the most important thing we have. This voting, yes, once every 4 years we cast our votes, and then these people we've hired act on our behalf. So, why can't you show your identification there? Open the way. Assessing the deception is unclear, but the goal is to open the way. By the way, even now, Hillary Clinton keeps saying that there was deception in 2016 and that's why she lost, and that deception was done by either Putin or Schmutin. It doesn't matter. Now, there are at least a dozen Democrats who claim that there was deception during the elections in their states, in their districts, and so on, and they don't agree with what's happening. And, so to speak, they're demanding a backbone. So, in general, it's actually a pretty normal situation when a person who thought they would be elected but wasn't thinks, how can this be? After all the results were there. So that means there was deception and fraud. Also, a lot of it is being covered up. So, in general, anything is possible now regarding the second part about whether Trump will, how was it phrased? What did you ask? To be more precise, you were talking about the split of turns, and the split, yes, whom do I support, and so on. The thing is, I proceed from one very simple thing. I have my own idea, developed by me over some years, about what, from my point of view, is good and what is bad. What's bad is when my hard-earned money is taken away from me. For example, I came up with a way to cure cancer. I make this medicine. There's a line of people waiting. I ask for $1,000 per dose. They pay me, and I become a billionaire. Very quickly, someone comes along and says, give away 60, 70, or 80% of this to someone else. I ask, to whom? To those who don't have money. Why should I give it away? I didn't agree to that, but they tell me, are you a bad billionaire? I say, wait a second, you just came to me, took my medicine, and said thank you so much, we're happy. Yes, now they want to take away 80% of that money. Or say in the city there are 3 people making shoes, and I make the best shoes, the most beautiful and the cheapest. Everyone comes to me and buys from me, the others go bankrupt, and then they come to me and say, come on, give us half or 60, 70%, just like the 90s in Russia. Is he drawing it out? Yes, that's America today. That's exactly America today. Congress gathers. 450 people come together and decide how much money to take away from me. When I resist, they say, we have democracy. Share. I refuse, and then they hit me on the head with a baton. Then I stand at home with a weapon in my hands, and then they kill me if I try to protect my own money so it isn't stolen from me. That's what I don't like. I actually believe that you have to live by a certain principle. This principle was created by Rav Gilel, a hero from ancient times I admire who lived a century before Jesus Christ. He put it this way, don't do to others what you don't want done to you. The golden rule appears in every nation and literature. Even Jesus Christ later repeated it with some changes. I prefer Gilel's version. So, from my point of view, what Trump is doing today is, in a striking way, exactly living by this principle when he says, guys, our America, our country, It lived for a very long time without stealing money from those people who produce something and earn from it. It lived for a very long time according to the principle of let's collect money from some other places. Like if someone wants to trade with us, let's charge them money for the right to bring goods to us. Well, that's even paying more. Yes, we will pay more, but at least we can produce something at home and we can compete with them. When people buy our products, our situation will improve. So if someone wants to buy from abroad, let them pay much more money. And if someone wants to buy local products, it's cheaper and so on. So Trump, from my point of view, is bringing us back to that very democracy. I don't like to use that word again. Actually, just so people understand what I'm talking about, I use that word. So he brings back that very democracy that the founding fathers envisioned, who based everything they said on the work called Common Sense, or simply Common Sense, by Thomas Paine, which was written and changed America. The entire American Revolution is based on this, they call it a pamphlet, 56 pages of pamphlet. And so Trump is not trying to bring us back to slavery or anything like that. He is trying to decentralize America, not to become a tyrant, but to decentralize America. That's why we are dismantling. Well, let's say, how dare he close the Department of Education? He wants to decentralize. On the contrary, he doesn't want to concentrate power, but to distribute this power. Because all he wants is to live by the principle that was proposed by that very slave Galel 100 years before the birth of Christ. And so Trump, who may or may not know him, but in a remarkable way, acts exactly like that intuitively. Not always, sometimes with force or ways I wouldn't choose, but he sees the goal and goes for it. This is a person who, in my opinion, has done more. You said in another speech that he destroyed NATO, but he didn't destroy it. He created NATO. He doesn't destroy America. He doesn't destroy the Republic. He strengthens it, reinforces it, and brings it to what it was always meant to be. Namely, the individual is more important than the organization. The individual is more important than society. The individual is more important than the state. Those who believe that society, the group, and so on are more important, they are Marxists or Trotskyists or Maoists or someone else. They are collectivists. And we really wanted them to leave, but honestly, we won't do that. They'll leave on their own without us helping them. Thank you.
Thank you, Leon Alexander. A comment, if possible, a short one if you can, because we have very little time left. I just want to remind our viewers and radio listeners that you are watching a debate on the Vera television radio channel between Leon Weinstein and Alexander Golfer regarding the presidency of Donald Trump. Today's debate topic is Trump evil or a gift of fate? Alexander, your comment and your last question is next. Well then.
My comment is brief, thank you. If we take Leon's speech, which I listened to with great interest, and run it through, let's say, artificial intelligence, we can identify, so to speak, the sources and components of this very ideology, which throughout history, especially the history of the last 200 years, has led to very sad consequences. I don't want to repeat myself. I just want to say that if this ideology and this, let's say, system of appealing to the masses prevails, then we are basically facing an authoritarian regime. Or, as I started with, we are facing an ochlocracy, that is the rule of demagogues and the populism of populists based on clouding the minds of a large number of people. I won't justify all of this right now because there's no time, but that's the feeling I have about what's happening.
Thank you, Alexander. And now your last question for Leon.
My last question for Leon. All right, go ahead, Leon. Tell me, how would you feel if after you came here from the you came from Israel just like I did, but that's not important when you found yourself here.
Alexander, I apologize, but Leon's question is actually our last one now because you asked a double question. I apologize. Yes, Leon, that's my fault. So yes, your question is actually the last one. Next, we'll have an open discussion with the remaining time.
Yes, we still need to discuss this.
We still have an open discussion, yes, but only if we have time to get to it. Yes, yes.
All right. As I understand it, we'll only have time for, as they say, a final argument, of course. Okay, well, let's give it a try. So, Trump, in just 1 year of his administration, brought $18 trillion in investments into American industry. For comparison, under Biden, only $1 trillion came in over 4 years. In the United States, car factories are being built, artificial intelligence centers are being created, and new power plants necessary for high-tech are being constructed. The United States has started working with cryptocurrency. We are building a protective dome, just like in Israel, but golden, since we like gold now, which means we are catching up with China's advantage in the Navy. Let's say in the United States, inflation is decreasing, wages are increasing, inflation is decreasing, wages are increasing by 100%. I can provide all the data again, but it would take too long. Customs duties make it possible to limit the import of goods that the United States must produce domestically, such as rare earths, magnets, and antibiotics. If we don't do this, China will strangle us by refusing to supply what we need for our military industry. Do you think that having many high-paying jobs for Americans is good for America or bad for America? Do you think that independence from China is good for America or bad for America? Do you think that protection from enemies is good for America or bad for America? And if you think that the above is good for America, why do you never say anything about it in your speeches or interviews and instead spend all your time saying nasty things?
From this, one can conclude that you are, of course, for all the good things and against all the bad things. But from what you said, I would say that you introduced a certain element of doubt into all these statements. Well, let's take tariffs, for example. Tariffs don't mean that someone pays us some money. Tariffs only lead to higher prices for imported goods. And for many goods produced here in the United States, which in general increases the cost of living. If we talk, for example, about the fact that we are fighting against China's rise, that we are trying to surpass China, I'll give you an example from recent statistics which shows that Chinese universities and colleges have surpassed American ones in their rankings and in the quality of scientific research conducted there, because the Chinese are investing money in higher education while Trump is imposing an unbearable tax on universities. And he's cutting funding not for humanities or social programs, but reducing funding for science, medical chemistry, physics, technology, and everything else. And in general, universities are withering. And this directly led to the fact that the Chinese have already surpassed the United States in many aspects of scientific and technological progress. That is, you can say a lot of good words about all the good things and about all the bad things. But if we talk about the results, about the cost of living, about the weight of the United States, about the significance of the United States in world politics and economics, all of this is going down. I don't see any particular reasons for optimism, so to speak, if this continues for another 1 or 2 presidential terms. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander Leon. If you have a comment, please go ahead.
Yes. Look, China has surpassed America in terms of level. So far, I don't see the number of startups that would surpass ours. I don't see any major discoveries or inventions coming from China. I don't see any Nobel laureates, or maybe there is 1 or 2. In science, I don't mean in music or something else. Science, I just don't see it. I look into this all the time. And there are 2 countries that contribute about 80% of what drives the world forward. One country is called the United States of America. The other is Israel. Practically no one else brings anything fundamentally new to the world, anything that would change everything. All those inventions, all those discoveries that happen, they happen in the United States of America, not in China. So your rather unchallenged claim that China has surpassed someone, the United States of America, seems strange to me. Now the Chinese are an amazingly uncreative people from China, especially over the last 100 years. After gunpowder, paper, and some other ancient invention, maybe from the Sumerians, nothing significant has happened since. In the last 200 years after Newton, let's say, pushed our science in a certain Western direction, nothing at all has happened in China. There's nothing now you can point to and say, they truly admire someone there. Maybe in Confucius's time, but not today. Excuse me, but your reasoning on tariffs is at a freshman level. I suspect that you're not really an economist because you know there's this guy Bastiat. There was a great man, an author who wrote an absolutely epoch-making work called What is Seen and What is Not Seen, and everyone should read it, from 5th grade, so to speak, to academia. What is seen and what is not seen, and here you are talking about what is seen. You see, it used to cost 10, then it went up by 2, now it's 1.2, and it was brought here. Now we must pay 12 plus profit instead of 10 plus profit. It's clear we're paying more, but what's unseen remains. Back when we paid 10, we couldn't produce it here. We couldn't compete. Now we pay 12, we can compete. And penicillin will be produced in the United States, and cars will be produced in the United States. Because we said, guys, if you bring cars here, we'll put a 15-20% tariff on them. So steel, we restored steel. Do you understand what it means that China's dumping led to, a dumping show? It cost 100 to make, but they sold it to us for 97s. Why? Because the Chinese government subsidized it in order to kill our steel industry, and they did. So how can we restore it? Should we impose a 20% tariff on it? So now, whether they want it or not, 97 plus 20 is still more than what it costs to produce here. Last year, we overtook Japan as the world's second largest producer. China is first now, having outpaced everyone, but we surpassed Japan again. And steel is essential. How can we go without steel, without tungsten, without antibiotics? Yes, we would suffocate tomorrow. Without rare earths, we can't fight China right now because in the middle of the war, we'll run out of rare earths and we won't be able to shoot at them. They control all these rare earth metals. What can we do? So the tariff is at the level, let's say, of a first-year student. It used to cost 10, now it costs 12. That's more. That's one thing. But when you talk about national security, the health of the nation and so on, you suddenly realize that this 10 plus 2 equals 12 has nothing to do with the calculation. So I apologize, of course, but what Trump said is actually a brilliant thing. Actually, there are a few brilliant inventions. One of them is insurance, and the other is the tariff. Yes, these things can bring us, America, to such a wonderful state. I'm not talking about the world or what's happening in Honduras. Excuse me, it's not my business. What's happening in Ukraine is generally none of my business. I can sympathize, send money, raise funds for something there, for helmets or bulletproof vests, which I did, shout, and so on. But by and large, it's not my business because I wouldn't send my own grandson there to fight. You know the difference, right? I wouldn't send him there, but I'd send him for America. There, it's their business, not mine. So if you look at all this on a certain level, without reading Bastiat, without understanding the situation, when there is something we see, and 1,000 times more that we don't see. If you don't know how to think critically, I'm not trying to offend anyone. I'm just saying that I have problems with music. I just don't hear the music there. I love classical, but I don't get it. My neighbor says, the second violin messed up, and I'm like, what? I didn't even notice the second violin playing. Yeah, so these are different things. I understand just a little bit of the basics, a little bit about political economy and economics. I'm saying what Trump is doing is genius, and if people don't understand that, well, what can you do? Now, I don't understand how a refrigerator works, but I swear, I know for sure. I put a jar of mayonnaise in there, close it, and after a while it's cold, and when you take it out, it stops being cold. and I don't care how it works. It's exactly the same because the lilac zones don't understand how tariffs work, but they do work and bring us jobs and security.
Thank you, Leon and Alexander. Unfortunately, we don't have time for anything else. All that's left is to ask you. Well, apparently no one has convinced anyone else. Naturally,
No, this conversation isn't meant to convince each other. It's meant to persuade or convince someone who's listening.
yes, you said that very well. Yes, I want to thank you, first of all, for agreeing and taking part. Well, it's a debate after all. Some people don't really like it, some try to avoid it. But thank you so much for.
If we're given the chance to speak.
Well, let's do it if we have time, because we basically have 10 minutes left, so let's do it. But I have a huge request. Please strictly follow the regulations. Let's even limit it to 5 minutes each, if you don't mind.
Just perfect, because
Thank you. Let's do it. Yes.
last time Alexander started, he was kind of put in a more uncomfortable position. So to speak, I already had the material when I started talking. Well, let's say I can put it this way. Let's
Alexander has no objections.
Let's see. Yes, no, it's kind of a plus. He will be the one to conclude, to finish. The final point will be his. Look, all of today's propaganda is based on a simple experiment conducted in the early 1950s by a certain Solomon Asch. So people were shown lines of different lengths and were asked to say out loud which of the 3 lines matched the sample. There was always one real subject in the group, and he didn't know about it. And several Confederates, usually 9 Confederates, and so to speak, one real subject, and he was seated last. So, by agreement, they would deliberately start giving obviously incorrect answers, but the same control showed that when alone, people answered correctly in almost 99% of cases, meaning when there was no one else, just one person looking at it, they answered correctly. But when everyone around started giving the wrong answer in unison, about 75% of the subjects followed the group and repeated the obvious mistake, even though they could see it was wrong. In further experiments in which this is called conformity, conformity noticeably decreased. So if there was at least one person in the group who answered differently from the majority, the subject noticeably and sharply reduced their agreement with the majority. In other words, one dissenter broke the sense of unanimity. The subject allowed himself much more often to say what he actually saw and thought. In the same way, the size of the group and its composition influenced the response. The larger the group, the stronger the effect. For example, not 9, but 20 people. You might think, whoa, maybe I'm going crazy. Yes, reducing the group from 9 to 3 led to a result where common sense prevailed. But these 3 could be wrong. It's not 9. If the answer had to be given not publicly, but say on paper or on a computer, then after listening to these 9 people, the 10th would answer sharply, shifting toward the rational. He didn't have to answer aloud. He could quietly respond on the computer so others wouldn't see. He answered correctly, not just as he thought. And finally, the last thing here. Next, I'll try, so to speak, to connect this to our situation. People with higher self-esteem were significantly more likely to remain independent. Let's analyze now what's actually happening right before our eyes. And it completely matches the repeatedly replicated experiment by Solomon Asch. You can be a top scientist or a janitor, gain fame or live quietly like Diogenes. Self-esteem, it can be affected by this, or it might not be. Very often, the self-esteem of someone satisfied with their life is much higher than the nervous, constantly changing self-esteem that's built on momentary success or failure. The psyche of a world-famous actor who belongs to the class of those educated in school or university, and determine in general that your belonging to one class or another does not define your ability to perform. It's the pressure of the society you live in that does. Among artists in universities, among journalists, psychologists, lawyers, There are Marxists who have gone into education. I use the word Marxist or the term Marxism as a general concept that unites a whole range of similar beliefs. But right away, we need to say what Karl Marx means. For if I'm not mistaken, 5 years. Every weekend, earning good money and significantly shaping young people's minds. So here in New York, he was published in a newspaper called the New York Herald or something like that. I don't remember, New York something. For 5 years, every Sunday. So he had an influence. So Marxists, meaning people who decided that the free market punishes the weak, after 50 years of teaching in America and Europe, became dominant and leading. And this led to the fact that this ideology became the main ideology of ANAPA. General Victoria, oh, the only one, I mean, as I say, would stand for the West. It's about critical thinking, the ability to draw conclusions, well, naturally. Just read, memorize, and accept it. Don't analyze or question it. So, a large number of our fellow countrymen, upon arriving in the new environment, started trying to blend in and, so to speak, change their appearance. We've shown over centuries that we're very good at this. Therefore, even without studying at American or European universities, a huge number of those who came with us from the Soviet Union or other countries, well, where we had the opportunity to experience it, know what collectivism is. Still, we fully left that experience behind to join a new society. Moreover, the more educated and humanitarian the society was, the more left-leaning and, well, as I say, Marxist it was. Learning that, a step to the left, a step to the right, ideologically, of course, leads to ostracism. You are immediately excluded from communication, from life, and you lose the opportunity to achieve what you are trying to achieve in the new society. That is, many of us started to behave and then justifying ourselves to think that this is what the new society is like, and to become a part of it, you have to think this way. I'm not saying that everyone is lying. No, maybe they are right, and then they realize that they need to act a certain way, and then they convince themselves that this is the right feeling and the right action. In the case of the Republican conservatives, with Trump as a sort of collective figure, instead of what the humanitarian society is talking about, they say that all of this is terrible. Those whom we call the left or leftists, well, they don't call themselves that. According to Solomon Ash's principle, when there are 9 people around them. Moreover, the illusions they have are about the people they want to be friends with, work with, and from whom they want to get something they've dreamed about. So they believe that this is the only correct conclusion and worldview they should follow. Well, so to speak, this is exactly that collectivist mindset from which they actually fled in the Soviet Union. These people hate those who haven't betrayed their principles, even at the expense of their own well-being. People who continue to act solely based on morality and logic have always infuriated conformists, so now I'm finishing up what's called the so-called Trump hatred syndrome. In reality, these are the consequences of, let's say, when people convince themselves that conformity is the only possible way, they end up fiercely hating those who prefer honesty over opportunism. I don't want you to think that I'm blaming anyone. No, on the contrary. I'm saying that mosquitoes bite some people and not others, and those who don't get bitten aren't better people than those who do. 100 people might catch some illness, like the flu, but the 101st person doesn't, simply because their body works differently. Sometimes it's luck, other times it's not. It can't be any other way. A person who sees that one line is longer than the other, but still can't make himself tell the truth, can't even look, doesn't go into a rage just because there's someone nearby who says what they see. That's why we can't argue with each other, because one part of our society hates the other, and the other despises those who have sold their souls. Additionally, here you go. To such people who can't even stay in a debate if they see that all their words are just emotions without any proof. That's why they either run away or start giving some emotional arguments, which aren't really arguments at all. In addition to that, there are also people who just serve for money or for something they get as a result of this service. That's why a person says things that, from my point of view, are absolutely illogical and go against common sense. How can someone belong to a movement, change from one gender to another, or say that being healthy means being a 2-meter tall man? And if he feels like a girl, he has the right to go to the showers with 15-year-old young girls? Or, for example, play on a women's team or go into women's boxing, or shout that you can't prefer white people for university jobs because that's racism, but you can and should prefer black people or those who are sexually obsessed because they have sexual relationships with the same sex instead of the opposite sex. All those who are shouting today that Trump is terrible, that he is harmful for the United States of America, for the world, unfortunately, they have entered this psychological state in which logic has long since stopped working. They can also be intellectuals and educated. But unfortunately, this very test that we are experiencing, there is simply no logic. We don't reply with numbers or facts. We only react emotionally and shift things around. No, it hasn't happened yet today, but it will definitely happen in the future. Why do I keep talking about Cassandras? Yes, we are not Cassandras. In 1900, people thought one thing. In 1920, World War happened, and everything became completely different. We can't predict. Yes, we can't assume. God decides there, right? So I want to say that, unfortunately, all my arguments with others, sadly, and why does it irritate me so much and I want to scream, why? What? How? Because there's no real dialogue with that side. And it doesn't work because one side has facts, numbers, comparisons, and the other side says, but this will definitely lead to something terrible. That's it, I'm done.
Thank you, Leon Alexander. Your final closing statement.
Well, I understand that time is up,
You have 5 minutes, but you have them.
But the only thing I can say is that everything we've heard in the last 5 minutes in this, so to speak, monologue and sermon can all be turned the other way around. And Solomon Ash's experiment is just as applicable to the inhabitants of this very bubble in which a significant part of Russian-speaking America and a significant part of the Make America Great Again movement are. All these people are just as much proof of Ash's experiment. That if you keep repeating all sorts of nonsense to them for a long time and refer to facts and arguments of unclear origin, they eventually start thinking the same way. Because they're incapable of critically analyzing what they hear, and that's the whole problem. So I would just take and repeat the words, send everything that Leon just said, but turn the pathos in the opposite direction. Now, that's why I think we won't be able to reach an agreement here. Indeed, I completely agree with this, that there are two almost irreconcilable positions here. Irreconcilable positions that cannot be resolved by compromise, but can only be resolved by recognizing a certain set of rules, which is what political democracy is. That there is a certain set of rules and everyone uses them, everyone follows them, and everyone agrees with them. Unfortunately, in my opinion, there is now a tendency to say that these rules should be abolished and that one's will should be imposed on those who disagree with you. That's kind of my first comment on what we've heard. Second, I want to recall, I think it was Churchill who said this about the Germans somewhere in the midst of World War II first. That this is not right. Who is voting for literacy. And now, although I'm sure Leon will turn this very quote around and direct it back at me, but one way or another, in my worldview, we are now facing the danger that people who don't need freedom and who are annoyed by the sight of free people, that the fact that in the coming years we may fall under their control with all the consequences that follow may become a reality. Perhaps that's all I want to say.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Thank you very much, Leon, once again for your time and for taking part in our debates. I believe the debates were a success. So once again, thank you very much. And until our next meeting, I hope maybe not as part of a debate, but simply, let's say, in joint conversations. Thank you once again. All the best to you. And as they say, God bless America.
And Canada, too. That's all. I hope you enjoyed it, but most importantly, that something became clearer to you. I really hope that I played some positive role in this process. And I have 2 questions for you. Yes, probably 2 questions. First, are you interested in these kinds of debates, disputes, discussions? Honestly, I'm afraid that after this, no one will want to debate with me again. This has happened several times before, then people forget after a year or 2, and then I have this kind of trouble again, I think. It turns out they have no arguments except for emotional outbursts. But again, everyone is like that. Maybe you'll think that I did something wrong there, so to speak, I apologize for this remark. And here's the second question. What did you like the most, and what did you dislike the most about our conversation today? It's very interesting because I'll probably even dedicate one of my shows to discussing this conversation, our dialogue, our debate, not sure what to call it. Maybe an innocent beating. Maybe, and I will definitely use your comments, so please write, but don't make them too long. I don't read long ones. Just make them clear so I understand what you mean. All right, that's all. Goodbye and see you next time. Goodbye.